Hello, everybody, and welcome back. So, today I want to talk a little bit about the prophetic vision of Aldous Huxley. Now, a little bit of background about him. He is, of course, an Englishman, in case you didn't know. He did later move to America, but he is originally English. Another little fun fact about him is that he used to be the teacher of George Orwell. So, actually, Aldous Huxley wrote his book Brave New World in 1931, and 1984 came out in he was writing it between 1948 and 1949. So that's when it came out. Now, there are some other things that he talks about. Of course, he talks in his dystopic novel about how the world would sort of come under control and ultimately to ruin because of the lusts and passions of man. Whereas in 1984, Orwell talks about the censorship and control and the sort of hatred that brings man under control. So they have pretty much opposed visions of the world, whereas in my opinion, I think that they both are right because both are happening. We're under control of both. So what I'd really like to draw your attention to is something else that Aldous Huxley talked about, and I think it's very pertinent to current days because he talks in this excerpt about nationalism and the religion of nationalism. And I want you to listen carefully and see if you can apply any of what he's saying to today. So let's have a listen.
The religion of the 20th century is, in fact, idolatrous nationalism. That there are the nominal religions, Christianity, Mohammedanism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and so on. But in fact, if you inquire what the actions of people mean, in fact, it's perfectly clear that the real religion is nationalism, that we worship the national state, that in fact we make use of the traditional religions to buttress the national state, and that new religions like communism are also used in the service of this great national idolatry. I mean, actually, Karl Marx made a grave mistake in underrating nationalism. He seems to have imagined that under the influence of socialist and communist doctrines, the masses of the people would give up nationalism. Not at all. He never foresaw what has in fact happened, that communist and socialist doctrines have become the servants of nationalism, the instruments of a particular nationalism, just in the same way in which, I'm afraid, it looks as though Orthodox Christianity and Orthodox Mohammedanism and Orthodox Judaism were fast becoming the instruments of their respective Western, Middle Eastern, or Jewish nationalism. This is one of the grave tragedies, and of course it confirms the profound wisdom which we find in the Old Testament, condemning idolatry as being a thing of unutterable danger. Well, as I say, the return to the individual, he, of course, worships himself, or if he thinks he's altruistic, he is what may be called an alter egoist. He worships some projection of himself. And in this absolutization of himself, he is, I think, assisted by the fact that he is a creature with a language. Now, we can never overestimate the importance of language in the life of human beings. Actually, that which causes us to be human rather than simply another of the apes is our ability to speak. This has given us the power to create a social heredity so that we can accumulate the knowledge amassed in past times, and has given us the power to analyze experience which comes to us in a very chaotic way and to make sense of it for our particular biological and social purposes. say this is the greatest gift which man has ever received or given himself, the gift of language. And but we have to remember that although language is absolutely essential to us, it can also be absolutely fatal because we use it wrongly. If we analyze our processes of living, we find that I imagine at least 50% of our life is spent in the universe of language. We are like icebergs uh, floating in a sea of immediate experience, but projecting into the air of language. And icebergs, I think, are about 9/10 or 4/5 underwater and 1/5 above. But I would say we are considerably more than that above. I should say we are the best part of 50%, and I think some people are about 80% above in the world of language. But they virtually never have a direct experience.
Now, the other very thing that he brought up here is the language part, and I just wanted to let it play out a little bit more because the two sort of tie in together. The way that we interpret everything is through our language, right? The way that we perceive things, the way that we describe them, they all make a great difference in how two people can have the exact same experience, and yet the way that they'll describe it to themselves, their internal dialogue and their external dialogue, that is what shapes their interpretation of everything. And so when we think about what we view as the state or our nation or the way that we frame what its proper role is, that is ultimately the difference between, as he talked about, communists or how the individuals perceive things, or any of the religious denominations, how they view what their nation should be. And so this is really important to think about because it seems that we all have a sort of, you know, our own vision for what we want the world to be. And yet, none of our visions, well, a lot of our visions do align, but there is no universal, singular way. And so, it's really, really difficult to create the kind of nation that we want to live in because we're constantly surrounded by other people who have, and I'm sorry to say, succumbed to a different set of prepositions and presuppositions, a different frame or narrative for what they want their nation to be, for what they want their community to be, they want their life to be. And this is ultimately why we're perpetually fighting and at war, because these two visions usually do not align. And where they do align, for example, among the populace, and the populace meaning the general public, even though there is divisions amongst us now, if, for example, there weren't, nevertheless, the ruling class would do what they can to alter those, those perceptions. And how do they alter these perceptions? Well, through the media, through mass communication, through visual, auditory, sensory inputs. All these, both overt and covert. The covert can be subliminal, but it can also be subtle and suggestive and implied. So when we think about control, do we have control over ourselves? Not really. One of the videos that I'm going to be doing in just a couple of days about NLP, it's about controlling the input and framing the input in such a way so as to have a different response. For example, some person might have a negative response to a certain stimuli, and by reframing that internal dialogue, you can turn that anxiety or stress into motivation to act in a different way. So these are all, various tactics that are employed, and very effectively employed, I might add, by what we colloquially call propaganda. But what is the original meaning for propaganda? Is to propagate, to push forward an idea. So it's aptly named. It is propagating an idea. It is propagandizing us. Now, there is good and bad propaganda. If you want, a good public service announcement to not smoke, to eat well, to exercise, and you make it cool, and all the cool people are eating right and healthy, and all the cool people don't smoke. Ew, smoking. That's good propaganda. Bad propaganda is, well, I think you all know it, warmongering, sexual liberation, quote unquote, um, not having a family, all these things that destroy society and destroy the soul and the individual ultimately. These are all bad versions of propaganda. So ultimately, every tool is how you use it. As he mentions, the religion of the state as a religion. Those two things are intertwined. The state may be of a secular humanist religion, it may be of a religious denomination, as he said, the Mohammedans, the Christians, the Judaists, whatever, a Hindu, Buddhist, whatever it is. But also, there are people who view the state as their religion. It's one thing to be patriotic and to love your country, but it's quite another thing to be preoccupied with anything but what the state is doing and what it should be doing. So these are statists that we call nationalist people. I think that's what the opposition is saying when they say that nationalism has a certain taint to it. Mind you, I don't think they came up with this idea on their own. I'm pretty sure it was put into their heads. And that, again, is what is the danger of this, is that all of these things that people think about oftentimes are not their own. There's a really great saying, and I like using it. People don't have ideas, ideas have people. The Germans call it sort of the Geist, the spirit, and it moves through history and it moves through time, and either its goals are fulfilled or it just keeps moving until it is. And it does seem that there is, and maybe you feel it and sense it too, it does seem like there is some sort of goal or purpose that whoever is, and we know who that person is, but, for the secular person, for what is trying to be achieved by all these, groups and governments and all the rest of it. And it's diametrically opposed to the logos, the order of what the world was meant to be. And I think people are starting to feel it and starting to come around to that idea, but they just don't know how to frame it. And, you know, again, there's another saying, not everyone is a believer, but everyone is religious. Marxism is a religion, being a Freudian is a religion, being a religious atheism is itself a religion. These people fundamentally believe in whatever it is that they believe. They have a doctrine, whereas our doctrine is given to us by our Creator. Their doctrine is self-imposed. They create their own doctrine, and that is what is so fundamentally dangerous, because you're operating on the whims of other people. And ultimately, as Huxley even pointed out, people worship themselves, and they worship a projection of themselves. That's why he said an alter egoist. You have your ego, which is you, and your alter ego is who you would like to be, a version of yourself. This comes up when we talk about dissociative identity disorder, commonly known as multiple personalities. These alters that are created during this trauma conditioning process and all the rest of it. This isn't new. There's nothing new under the sun, and yet it keeps happening. And the reason it keeps happening and is so effective is because people either don't know about it, they plug their ears and don't want to hear it, and ultimately they are a victim to something that can very well be avoided, or at least reduced. So I hope that you found this informative. There's a lot more to talk about with Huxley, and if anyone has read the book, then maybe we can do a book club kind of book review or something like that. So if you leave me in the comments how many people have actually read it, then I will consider, getting together some notes and discussing the book itself and what it implies and how we can apply it to our future or present even. So, as I said, lots of very interesting things about Huxley, and you may know his is it brother? I think Julius Huxley as well. So Julian, I think. So you may want to look into all the rest of it, but um, that's pretty much all I wanted to say. All right, take care, guys.